Good morning, LA Pipe Smoker. Saturday morning in Los Angeles, cloudy, a little rainy, very much into the winter spirit today. So I'm kind of enjoying that. I'm just finished breakfast. I'm smoking my custom made pipe, not custom built. This is this is the pipe that I bid for on eBay and got it at a pretty good price, kind of thinking it was custom built because in the description of the auction it said custom built style, and I kind of missed the style part, and I got a pipe that is very much like a custom built. You can kind of see it has that phrasing around the bowl. It kind of looks like a rich era custom built, but in fact it is a custom made, sort of a imitation knockoff. So I got a little disappointed that it, and later, I went back on and got a couple of custom built pipes. But there's a good lesson in this. One, you probably should read the description if you're going to go on eBay and spend money. But second, and maybe most important, it smokes great. It's one of my favorite pipes. So it's good briar. It's very light. It's got a vulcanite stem. It's got a bit of a mismatch though. The stem and the shank are a little out of alignment, but it smokes beautifully. And in it today, I am smoking Philosopher's Blend. It's a tinderbox. It's an English blend. It's made up of Virginias, which are kind of sweet, and Orientals, which are kind of spicy. And it's really a delightful little blend. And so I thought today, what I would do is I would talk a little bit about my passion for philosophy. And I've had a passion for philosophy ever since I was a kid. I think I remember my first philosophical encounter at church. I was back in Pittsford, New York, going to the Presbyterian church. And one thing was definitely true about me then. I would wake up in the morning on school days and I would say to myself, oh God, I don't want to go to school. So I would say that, all right? And on Sunday mornings, I would wake up and I would say, oh God, I don't want to go to church, right? Kind of typical teenager, maybe typical adult. I say that sometimes myself, and as you know, I'm a priest, so sometimes I wake up Sunday morning and I actually do say, oh God, I don't want to go to Mass. So yeah, confessions of a reluctant priest sometimes. Probably pretty much a human thing. At any rate, I digress, which is normal, which makes for longer videos. Anyway, I went to church and I thought about this idea, and I was sitting there not listening to the sermon, just kind of letting my mind wander. And I came to the conclusion that probably was better to believe in the existence of God than not in the existence of God. That if you believed not in the existence of God, if you were an atheist and God really did exist, you probably were in trouble once you die, you go to hell or whatever, suffering. But if you believed in the existence of God and God didn't exist, then you're in the same boat as everybody else, and whatever happens, happens, and that's it. So I thought, well, given the odds, it's probably a better situation to believe in the existence of God, just in case God really does exist and he's pissed if you don't believe in him, that kind of thing. And so I told our pastor that, and he told me that was called Pascal's Wager. And to my amazement, I was like, wow, you mean some other person in history had thought about this before and had written about it? And he says, absolutely. Pascal, who was a 17th century French mathematician, had. And so I went and looked it up and read about it, and was delighted that I had actually thought something that some smart guy had thought of, and I was quite pleased. I was like, wow, this is interesting. It was also a little discouraging because I had kind of thought that was my original thought, that I had kind of thought that up myself. And to my disappointment, no, somebody much smarter than me and much more articulate than me had thought of that. And that's really probably where I trace the beginnings of my philosophical life. As you know, I teach English. My degree's in English. Insofar as my teaching goes, although as a priest I had to study philosophy as well, so I have formal academic training in philosophy as well as some graduate school training in philosophy. So I've got a little bit of both, kind of the formal and the informal education. So what I thought I would do today is for those of you who are kind of philosophically inclined and wanted maybe a little bit of advice as to how to structure your investigations, that I would pass along some suggestions. Take it or leave it. I mean, if it proves to be helpful for you, then so much the better. And if it's not so helpful, then just forget about it and drown your sorrows in pipe smoking or something. I don't know. So let's talk about how you start. Well, I think the best way to start in philosophy is not to read a lot of philosophy. I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but hear me out. I think the best way to probably begin might be taking a course in reasoning, critical thinking, whatever you want to call it, logic, introduction to logic, whatever, so that you can hone your thinking skills, because I think that's very helpful to hone your thinking skills so you can make some advancement in your thoughts and in your reasoning that are going to be coherent and fruitful for you and for others who encounter you. So I think that's a great way to start. The second thing is to begin with a question that interests you, that you have some passion about, so that you can have the fuel necessary to endure sometimes the drudgery of study and reading and writing and discussing. It provides you with a kind of a fire, a sense of necessity that will serve you well in your philosophical musings. But not all questions really are philosophical questions. I'll give you an example. So, if you had a question that you're really interested in, like, how does an airplane actually fly? How does the wing actually generate lift? Well, that's not a philosophical question, is it? Because you can answer the question by referencing empirical data, empirical observations. And we call that science. So that's not really philosophy. Philosophy attempts to answer questions which empirical science alone cannot answer. So, a typical philosophical question might be something like, does God exist? What is God? Is there a God? So on and so forth. So questions like that. What is justice? How to live a happy life? Do we really think? Do we really exist? There is the solipsistic worldview of, I am the only real, living, thinking person. Everybody else in existence is simply a projection of my thought process. So that's kind of cool. One thing I encourage my students to do sometime who are kind of interested, I said, go to a mirror, look in the mirror, and ask yourself this question. Why this consciousness in this particular body at this particular time? That's a philosophical question. So you got to have some sort of philosophical question to begin with. And I generally think it's probably better to begin by dealing with the question yourself. Now, maybe you've had some training in thinking and stuff like that, so that's good. You know, that can aid you into making your writing and your thinking a little bit more cogent, perhaps. So you just start. You start by identifying terms in your question. If we'll just use the example of, does God exist? Some terms that would need definition would be things like God and things like exist. So those would be important terms in the question. So why do we have to identify the terms? Why do we have to deal with the terms first? Well, it's very simple. It's difficult to discuss something with someone else if you don't share some essential definitions. So the popular phrase of that is you're comparing apples to oranges. So if your definition of existence is different than the person you're discussing this with, it's very difficult to have a fruitful discussion or a fruitful argument. So taking the time to be aware of how you define the terms of your argument or your ideas is essential, is really important. So once you get past that, you start building, start developing some statements. We call those premises. So these are the foundational, the building blocks of your idea. Which of these would be what are called a priori, or they are statements which are so foundational that they are self-evident and don't need to be proved. So every system has a priori statements, even mathematics. Every system within mathematics has its axioms, has its axiomatic statements, such that you then build on those and it creates a system that you can apply to a particular problem. So the calculus is a form of mathematical reasoning which has a certain set of assumptions that then are combined together to form a rather beautiful system, and which is used to apply to problems of trajectory and movement and so on and so forth. And so every system, philosophical included, are going to have a priori or foundational statements which you believe are self-evident and don't require proof. So you got to get used to that sort of thing. So you kind of, you work your way down and you start to develop these ideas. I think once you get yourself kind of going, you also want to write. I think this is really important. And you write in a way which helps you to clarify the questions and your answers and your a priori statements. And this back and forth, this discursive kind of activity where you're thinking and you're writing, you're thinking, you're writing, or you're like me, you talk to yourself or you talk to your cat. All of this stuff helps you kind of clarify your answer, your responses, and helps you order your thinking. And when you're ready, find someone who perhaps has not done a lot of reading on the topic, who won't be bringing in authors that you're not familiar with, and find someone who's willing to kind of share your thinking and your process of reasoning and getting their reflections, not so much in an attempt to justify your answer, although maybe some of that will be part of your discussion, and not so much to defeat the other person's ideas, although you probably will want to test their ideas out to see if they really are important and are valid. But mostly to be able to enter into a discussion that's going to help you, kind of like your writing did, clarify and give you some conciseness and some understanding in a more structured way of your argument. So if you find somebody and you agree upon your particular terms, then you have this structure that you share, and you can join together in your investigation, which can be very fruitful. And then after a period of time, depending upon how much time you have, then that might be a good time to seek out somebody who is a scholar in your particular area of interest. So maybe metaphysics for does God exist type of thing, and who spent their entire life reading and writing and who has advanced pretty far in the scholarly life of looking at this particular question, and ask them for some help. You can do that by enrolling in a course or finding somebody who has this may be more difficult, who has a little bit of time on their hands and is willing to sit down and to mentor you. The way I've done it typically is taken courses and then availed myself of the office hours of the professor to discuss things with, or taking the professor out to dinner and pumped him for information. And he might provide you with some observations on your particular thought and direct you to some writings that are out there that have addressed the question in the past and maybe somewhat successfully. For instance, on the question of the existence of God, maybe he'll point you in the direction of Descartes' ontological or a priori argument, and you can read that and you might say, wow, so Descartes is, part of his argument's a lot like my argument, and have that kind of moment of aha, which makes you more interested. And then maybe you can go on to, St. Anselm and then St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and all of these people who have written about this question. So you're getting different perspectives and you're starting to deepen your ideas. And of course, all along the way, you're writing and you're trying to understand their arguments and how they respond to each other and how they respond to you. And you become more familiar not only with the question, but with possible answers. And it starts to solidify and it starts to give you a certain degree of confidence that you've got this topic. And you can speak about it intelligently and you can write about it intelligently, and you have a better understanding of the question and a possible answer than you did when you started, maybe months or years ago. And so if that sounds enjoyable, I invite you to do it. But if you can, start with your own thinking. Don't start with other philosophers right away. Wait until you've developed your own thoughts and that you've gone as far as you can go with it yourself before you start adding on to it or starting to join the conversation of other philosophers. And the only exception, as I mentioned earlier, would be to train yourself in reasoning and both formal and informal fallacies, being able to suss out of an essay its essential argument, to be able to evaluate an argument. Those skills, I think, are good precursors to starting your own thoughts. I think that might keep you from going down a particular avenue which is patently fruitless, and might provide you with some more ideas. Also, keeping a little book, something to write your thoughts down, a way of processing it, as I said earlier, can be helpful. So that's my philosophy blend induced discussion today. I wish you a wonderful weekend. I wish you a dry weekend if you're in Southern California. You don't get too wet. I hope you don't discover that your windshield wipers are not working and have to go to Pep Boys and stand in line only for them to tell you, I'm sorry, sir, we don't have your kind of wiper blade. So I wish you the best. I hope you have a great week. I hope you're not stressing out over the holidays. I hope you're able to find some joy in the moment and in the days ahead. And I look forward to sharing a pipe and a discussion with you again soon. Have a good one.